Woman's pregnancy announcement turns into a nightmare after husband's reaction. Sarah couldn't help but smile as she walked through her front door, dropping her teaching bag by the entrance like she did every day after school. The house wasn't anything fancy, just a modest two-bedroom place with slightly outdated kitchen cabinets and that one creaky floorboard near the living room that they kept meaning to fix. But it was home, and it held 6 years of memories with Mark. Before we can continue, if you love your family, subscribe to this channel to help up creating amazing stories. Now, let's continue. She kicked off her shoes, thinking about the finger paintings her preschoolers had made today. Teaching 4-year-olds was exhausting, but there was something magical about watching their faces light up when they finally wrote their names or successfully counted to 20. Today, little Tommy had finally managed to zip up his own jacket, and the pride in his eyes had made her whole day worth it. The familiar smell of coffee lingered in the kitchen from Mark's morning routine. He always left the house before her, heading to his accounting firm downtown where he'd been putting in longer hours lately. Sarah understood. They talked about his upcoming promotion, and she knew how important it was to him. Still, she missed their morning conversations over breakfast, the way they used to plan their days together while sharing toast and scrambled eggs. She walked to the kitchen, running her hand along the worn countertop as she filled the kettle for tea. Their evening routine was her favorite part of the day. Mark would come home around 6, and they'd cook dinner together, sharing stories about their day. Sometimes they'd just throw together a quick pasta. Other times they'd attempt something more ambitious from those cooking shows they loved to watch. Either way, it was their time to reconnect, to remember why they'd fallen in love in the first place. Their conversations would flow easily, spanning from silly workplace drama to deeper discussions about their dreams. They talked about having kids countless times over the years, painting pictures of future family vacations, and debating baby names. But something always seemed to come up. First it was paying off student loans, then saving for the house, and now Mark's career was taking priority. Sarah tried not to let it bother her, but lately, she'd found herself lingering a little longer whenever she passed the empty bedroom that could be a nursery. The sound of children playing outside caught her attention, and she walked to the window. The neighbors' kids were riding their bikes up and down the street, their laughter carrying through the glass. Sarah felt that familiar twinge in her chest, a mixture of longing and hope that she'd been carrying around more and more lately. She loved their life, she really did. Their quiet evenings, weekend brunches, and spontaneous movie nights made her happy. But there was a growing part of her that wanted more, that dreamed of adding the chaos and joy of a child to their cozy routine. Later that evening, as Sarah prepared dinner, she thought about how to bring up the topic of starting a family again. Mark had been more stressed lately, taking work calls during dinner and spending weekends at the office. She knew it wasn't the right time, but when would it be? At 32, she felt ready, more than ready, to be a mother. Her friends from college were all having their second or third kids, filling her social media feed with first steps and birthday parties. The sound of Mark's key in the door pulled her from her thoughts. He walked in, looking tired but managing a smile when he saw her. "Something smells good," he said, loosening his tie and giving her a quick kiss. Sarah noticed the new wrinkles in his shirt, signs of another long day at the office. "Just throwing together that chicken dish you like," she replied, watching as he rolled up his sleeves to help with the vegetables. This was normal, comfortable. They moved around each other in the kitchen with the easy familiarity of people who'd shared the same space for years. "How are the kids today?" Mark asked, dicing a cucumber for the salad. He always asked about her students, remembering their names and little stories she'd shared. "Tommy finally mastered his zipper," Sarah said, grinning. "You should have seen his face. Like he'd just won an Olympic medal." Mark laughed, and for a moment, Sarah could picture him with their own child, teaching them to tie their shoes or ride a bike. She pushed the thought away, focusing instead on their dinner and his stories about work. They ate at their small kitchen table, the one they'd bought at a flea market when they first moved in. Mark talked about his new project, something about quarterly reports and client meetings. Sarah noticed the way his shoulders tensed when he mentioned his boss's expectations. She wanted to reach across the table, to tell him that maybe their simple life was enough, that they didn't need the bigger house or fancier car he was working so hard for. After dinner, They settled into their usual spots on the couch, some random Netflix show playing in the background. Sarah curled up against Mark's side, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with laundry detergent. These moments were perfect, or almost perfect. There was just that tiny voice in the back of her mind, wondering if there could be more. The week continued like this, each day a comfortable echo of the one before. Sarah loved their routine, she really did. But every morning, as she watched her students' parents drop them off at school, she felt that yearning grow stronger. She imagined herself in their place, holding a little hand, giving quick goodbye kisses, promising to hear all about their day later. She didn't know then that everything was about to change, that the comfortable life they'd built was about to be turned upside down by 2 little pink lines on a pregnancy test. For now, she was just Sarah, Mark's wife, living their quiet life in their modest house, holding her dreams close to her heart and waiting for the right moment to share them. Sarah stared at the pregnancy test for what felt like hours, sitting on the edge of their bathtub. She'd taken 3 tests just to be sure, and they all showed the same result. Pregnant. Her hands were shaking as she gathered the tests and wrapped them in tissue paper, hiding them at the bottom of the trash can. She needed time to process this before telling Mark. The whole week passed in a blur of excitement and anxiety. She caught herself touching her stomach during story time at school, wondering if it was too early to feel anything. Every time she saw Mark, the words nearly bubbled up, but she held them back. She wanted this moment to be special, something they'd tell their child about someday. Sarah spent Thursday afternoon after school shopping for the perfect way to tell him. The mall was crowded with after-work shoppers, but she barely noticed them, lost in her own world of possibilities. She found herself in a tiny boutique, running her fingers over soft baby clothes until she spotted them, the tiniest pair of white leather shoes she'd ever seen. They were perfect, simple but sweet. She added a blue gift box and ribbon, her heart racing as the cashier rang up her purchase. Friday morning, she called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. She needed the day to prepare everything. Their small kitchen seemed different somehow as she planned the evening, like the whole house was holding its breath. She made multiple trips to the grocery store, wanting everything to be perfect. Mark's favorite pasta, fresh bread, that expensive wine he loved but only bought on special occasions. She spent an hour arranging and rearranging the dining room table, switching between candles and fresh flowers, then deciding to use both. The baby shoes sat in their gift box on the counter, wrapped in silver paper with a blue bow. Every few minutes, she'd check her phone, counting down the hours until Mark would be home. Around 4, she started cooking, following his mother's recipe for the pasta sauce that Mark always said reminded him of Sunday dinners growing up. The familiar routine of chopping garlic and stirring the sauce helped calm her nerves. She kept picturing his face when he'd open the box, imagining his eyes lighting up, his smile spreading slowly as he realized what it meant. Sarah changed her outfit 3 times before settling on a simple blue dress that Mark had always liked. She kept checking her reflection in the hallway mirror, wondering if she looked different somehow, if anyone could tell just by looking at her that she was carrying this amazing secret. Her hand kept drifting to her stomach, still flat but now holding so many possibilities. At 5:45, she heard Mark's car pull into the driveway. Her heart started racing all over again. This was it, the moment that would change everything. She smoothed her dress one last time and went to greet him at the door, the same way she had hundreds of times before, but nothing about this evening would be like those other times. "Something smells amazing," Mark said as he walked in, giving her a quick kiss. He looked tired, his tie slightly loose, but his smile was genuine as he took in the table setting. "What's the occasion? Can't I just do something nice for my husband?" Sarah tried to keep her voice casual, but her hands were trembling as she took his briefcase and coat. "Why don't you go change? Dinner's almost ready." They sat down to dinner, and Sarah could barely eat, her stomach doing flips every time she thought about the gift box waiting in the kitchen. Mark didn't seem to notice her nervousness, talking about his day between bites of pasta. Something about a difficult client and a presentation that had gone well. She nodded along, trying to focus on his words instead of the way her heart was pounding. "This is really good," he said, reaching for more bread. You outdid yourself, honey. But seriously, what's going on? Did you get that promotion at school? Sarah shook her head, standing up suddenly. Actually, I do have something for you. Wait here. She hurried to the kitchen, her hands shaking so badly she almost dropped the gift box. This was the moment she'd been dreaming about, not just all week, but for years really. She took a deep breath and walked back to the dining room. Mark looked puzzled when she handed him the box. It's not our anniversary, is it? He checked his watch as if the date might be displayed there. I didn't forget something important, did I? Just open it, Sarah said softly, perching on the edge of her chair. She watched as he carefully untied the ribbon, taking his time with the paper like he always did, folding it neatly instead of tearing it. The anticipation was making her dizzy. When he lifted the lid and saw the tiny white shoes, his face went completely blank. Sarah held her breath, waiting for his expression to change, for the joy to spread across his features. But seconds ticked by, and that blank look remained. Sarah? His voice was strange, tight. He picked up one of the shoes, holding it like it might break, or like it might bite him. Are you pregnant? She nodded, tears starting to fill her eyes. But they weren't the happy tears she'd imagined. Something was wrong. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. I thought we were being careful. Mark set the shoe back in the box with deliberate care.
We talked about this.
About waiting until things settled down at work. We did, but... Sarah's voice caught in her throat. I thought you'd be happy. Mark stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Happy? Sarah, I just took on 2 new major clients. I'm up for junior partner. The timing couldn't be worse. The candles on the table flickered as he paced the small dining room. Sarah sat frozen, her hand unconsciously moving to her stomach, protective already. The perfect dinner grew cold on their plates, the romantic setting now feeling like props in some cruel play. We can't do this right now, Mark continued, running his hands through his hair. There has to be, we need to think about this rationally. There are options. Options? Sarah's voice came out as a whisper. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. She felt sick, and this time it wasn't morning sickness. I'm just saying, we need to discuss this. Mark wouldn't look at her now. We're not ready for a baby. Our lives aren't set up for this. The house is too small, we'd need a new car, and the medical bills alone. Sarah stood up slowly, her legs unsteady. The room seemed to be spinning slightly. All her careful planning, the joy she'd been carrying around all week, the future she'd imagined, it was all crumbling around her. She looked at Mark, really looked at him, and for the first time in their marriage, she felt like she was seeing a stranger. I need some air, Mark said finally, grabbing his keys from the counter. The front door closed behind him with a quiet click that somehow hurt more than if he'd slammed it. Sarah stood in their dining room, surrounded by cooling food and flickering candles, one hand still resting on her stomach, feeling more alone than she ever had in her life. The tiny shoes sat in their box on the table, innocent and white in the candlelight, now looking less like a joyful announcement and more like the beginning of the end of everything she'd thought she knew about her marriage. The weekend after Sarah's announcement stretched out like an endless void. Mark came home late that Friday night, and they both pretended to sleep, lying rigid on opposite sides of their bed. The silence in their usually comfortable home felt suffocating. Sarah spent Saturday morning in the bathroom, fighting waves of morning sickness alone, while Mark left early claiming he needed to catch up on work at the office. Every time her phone buzzed, Sarah hoped it was Mark wanting to talk, to tell her he'd just been shocked and that everything would be okay. Suddenly embrace the future she'd thought they both wanted. Tomorrow, she would start preparing for this baby on her own terms. She would call her sister, tell her parents, reach out to the friends she'd been avoiding. If Mark wanted to be part of it, the door would be open. But she wouldn't put her life, their baby's life, on hold waiting for him to walk through it. She placed her hand on her still flat stomach, whispering a quiet promise in the darkness. It's okay, little one. We're going to be fine, no matter what. For the first time since that dinner, she felt truly certain about something. Whatever happened with Mark, whatever challenges lay ahead, She would face them. She had to. She was a mother now. Sarah's hands shook as she dialed her sister Amy's number the next morning. She sat in her car in the school parking lot, 30 minutes early for work, needing this moment of privacy. The phone rang twice before Amy's familiar voice answered, bright and cheerful as always. "Hey sis, you're calling early. Everything okay?" Sarah took a deep breath. "I'm pregnant." The silence lasted only a second before Amy squealed with delight. "Oh my God, Sarah. That's amazing. How far along are you? How did Mark react? Why didn't you tell me sooner?" The questions tumbled out, and Sarah felt tears starting to fall, not from sadness this time, but from relief at finally sharing her secret. When she got to Mark's reaction, her voice cracked. He's not happy about it. He says we can't afford it, that it's not the right time." The words felt heavy, more real now that she was saying them out loud. "Oh, honey." Amy's voice softened. "Want me to come over? I can be there in an hour." That afternoon, Amy showed up at Sarah's classroom just as the last student left. She took one look at her sister and pulled her into a tight hug. They ended up at the little coffee shop around the corner, Sarah with her new favorite ginger tea, Amy with her usual latte. "Have you told Mom and Dad yet?" Amy asked, stirring her coffee. Sarah shook her head. "You're the first person I've told. I've been keeping it to myself, trying to figure things out with Mark." "Well, that stops now." Amy reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You're not alone in this, okay? Mark might need time to get his head straight, but you've got me. And Mom and Dad are going to be over the moon. You know how long they've been hoping for a grandchild." For the first time in days, Sarah felt like she could breathe properly. They spent the next hour making plans, doctor's appointments Amy would attend if Mark didn't, shopping trips for maternity clothes, ideas for telling their parents. That evening, instead of going straight home to another silent dinner, Sarah drove to her parents' house. Her mom took one look at her face and somehow just knew, the way mothers often do. Within minutes, Sarah found herself wrapped in her mother's arms, her dad hovering nearby with tears in his eyes. Mark struggling with the news, she admitted as they sat around the kitchen table, her mom already pulling out ingredients to make Sarah's favorite comfort food. "He'll come around," her dad said firmly. "He's probably just scared. I was terrified when your mom told me she was pregnant with Amy. Didn't sleep for a week." "But you were happy about it," Sarah said quietly. Her mom stopped chopping vegetables and came to sit beside her. "Honey, men process these things differently sometimes. Give him time. But remember, you're a Carter woman and Carter women are strong. Whatever happens, this baby is a blessing, and we're all here for you both." The next few weeks brought changes Sarah hadn't expected. Her best friend Rachel, after hearing the news, immediately added her to a local moms group chat. At first, Sarah felt overwhelmed by the constant stream of messages, but soon found herself drawn into their conversations about morning sickness remedies and pregnancy-safe exercise classes. On a Tuesday evening, instead of going home to another tense dinner with Mark, she attended her first group meeting. The community center room was filled with women at various stages of pregnancy, some with partners, some without. Sarah sat quietly at first, listening to their stories and struggles. "First time?" asked the woman next to her, who introduced herself as Jenny. Her rounded belly suggested she was further along than Sarah. "Is it that obvious?" Sarah managed a small smile. "Only because I looked just as terrified at my first meeting," Jenny laughed. "I'm here every week if you want a friendly face to sit with." As the meeting progressed, Sarah found herself sharing more than she'd planned. When she mentioned Mark's reaction, several women nodded in understanding. One shared how her husband had also panicked initially, but came around by the second trimester. Another spoke about choosing to be a single mom. Their stories weren't exactly like hers, but each one helped her feel less alone. The group became her weekly anchor. She learned about local resources she hadn't known existed, got recommendations for doctors, and found comfort in the shared experience of other women facing their own challenges. Jenny, in particular, became a close friend, sharing her own journey of adjusting to pregnancy while managing a demanding career. At school, Sarah started noticing things differently. She paid more attention to how her students' parents managed pickups and drop-offs, mentally taking notes on their routines. She found herself talking more with the single moms, learning how they balanced work and childcare. One morning, she arrived early to set up her classroom and found Lisa, one of her students' mothers, looking stressed as she dropped off her daughter. "Everything okay?" Sarah asked. Lisa sighed. "Babysitter canceled last minute for tonight. I have a crucial work presentation tomorrow and needed those hours to prepare." Before she knew it, Sarah heard herself offering to help. That evening, she sat with Lisa's daughter while Lisa worked, the little girl teaching Sarah all about her favorite cartoon characters. Watching them together later, Lisa efficiently making dinner while her daughter did homework at the kitchen table, Sarah felt a surge of confidence. If Lisa could manage this on her own, maybe she could too. The experience sparked something in Sarah. She started making concrete plans instead of just worrying about the future. She researched daycare costs and started a separate savings account. She looked into her insurance coverage and made lists of everything she'd need for the baby. Each small step made her feel more capable, more in control. Her morning sickness began to ease, and with it came a new kind of energy. She started taking prenatal yoga classes recommended by the Moms Group, where she met even more women walking similar paths. Every new connection, every shared story, added another thread to the support network she was building. One evening, as she sat in her car after a group meeting, Sarah realized something had shifted inside her. The fear and uncertainty were still there, but they no longer felt overwhelming. She had found strength in these new friendships, these women who understood what she was going through. They weren't the support system she'd expected to have during her pregnancy, but maybe they were exactly what she needed. The change in Mark started so gradually that Sarah almost missed it at first. It began with small things. He started asking how she was feeling in the mornings, his voice careful but genuine. He stopped working late every night, making it home for dinner more often. One evening, she caught him staring at the baby shoes she'd kept on their dresser, his expression thoughtful instead of panicked. The real shift came when Sarah was folding laundry one Sunday afternoon. She'd started buying maternity clothes, and as she sorted through them, Mark appeared in the doorway of their bedroom. "Need help?" he asked, hands stuffed in his pockets like a nervous teenager. Sarah nodded, surprised but trying not to show it. They folded in silence for a few minutes before Mark picked up one of her new shirts, running his thumb over the extra fabric meant to accommodate her growing belly. "When did you get these?" he asked softly. "Last weekend. Amy went shopping with me." Sarah watched his face carefully. "They were on sale." Mark nodded, still holding the shirt. "You shouldn't have to shop sales for things you need." I haven't been fair to you." The words hung in the air between them. Sarah felt her heart speed up but forced herself to stay quiet, to let him continue. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," Mark said, finally setting down the shirt. "I looked at our finances again. Really looked at them. We could make it work if we're careful. Maybe I was too quick to panic about the money." Sarah sat down on the edge of their bed, her legs suddenly shaky. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying..." Mark sat beside her, leaving a careful space between them. "I'm saying maybe I was wrong. About everything. I've been so focused on what could go wrong that I didn't let myself think about what could go right." For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt hope flutter in her chest. "There's an appointment on Thursday," she said carefully. "Just a regular checkup. You could come if you want." Mark was quiet for a moment, then reached over and took her hand. "What time?" That Thursday, Sarah held her breath as she waited in the doctor's office, half expecting Mark to cancel at the last minute. But at 3:55, he walked in, still in his work clothes, but there. Actually there. The nurse called them back, and Sarah watched Mark take everything in, the posters on the wall showing fetal development, the model of a pregnant belly on the counter, the software of medical equipment. He looked overwhelmed but stayed close to her, his hand finding hers when the doctor started the ultrasound. The moment they heard the heartbeat, strong and fast through the speakers, Sarah felt Mark's hand tighten around hers. She turned to look at him and saw tears in his eyes. "That's..." He started, his voice rough. "Your baby," the doctor finished with a smile. "Everything looks perfect. Would you like to know how far along you are?" The drive home was quiet, but different from their recent silences. Mark kept glancing at the ultrasound picture Sarah held, a small black and white blob that somehow made everything more real. "We could paint the spare room," he said suddenly. "This weekend, if you want. I know it's early, but—" Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. Stupid hormones. "I'd like that." They spent Saturday comparing paint samples, arguing playfully over shades of yellow and green. Mark insisted on doing the painting himself, making Sarah stay downstairs because of the fumes. She sat in the living room, listening to him move furniture and prep the walls, each sound feeling like a step toward the future she'd hoped for. The next few weeks brought more changes. Mark started coming to her prenatal appointments regularly. He downloaded a pregnancy app on his phone, sometimes sharing random facts about the baby's development over breakfast. "Did you know the baby's only the size of a lime right now?" he'd say, or, "Apparently they can hear us already." One evening, Sarah came home to find Mark in the future nursery, surrounded by boxes and instruction manuals, attempting to assemble a crib. "It was on sale," he said sheepishly when he saw her. "I thought, well, we'll need it eventually, right?" She joined him on the floor, helping him sort through the pieces. They worked together, laughing at the confusing instructions and their own clumsy attempts at furniture building. It felt like old times before the pregnancy, when they were just Mark and Sarah figuring things out together. But sometimes, Sarah would catch a shadow pass over Mark's face when she talked about the future. He'd grow quiet when she mentioned childcare costs or started planning for her maternity leave. These moments were brief but noticeable, like clouds passing over the sun. During dinner with her parents, when her dad started talking about college funds and life insurance, Sarah saw Mark's shoulders tense. He excused himself early, claiming work deadlines, but Sarah recognized the look in his eyes, the same panic from when she'd first told him about the pregnancy. Later that night, she found him in their home office, staring at spreadsheets on his laptop. "We don't have to figure everything out right now," she said softly. Mark rubbed his eyes. "I just want to make sure we're prepared. There's so much we need to think about." Sarah wanted to believe his renewed interest in the baby meant all his doubts were gone. She wanted to trust that his enthusiasm was genuine, not just an attempt to make her happy. But sometimes, in quiet moments like this, she wondered if he was still trying to convince himself as much as her. The sound of their baby's heartbeat from the last appointment played in her mind, strong and steady. Whatever happened, whatever doubts Mark still carried, that sound was real. Their baby was real. And for now, that had to be enough. 3 months into her pregnancy, Sarah started showing more obviously. Her regular clothes felt tighter, and she'd begun wearing the maternity clothes she bought with Amy. Each morning, she'd catch Mark watching her as she got ready for work, his expression a mix of wonder and something else she couldn't quite read. The nursery was half finished now. The pale green walls were done, and the crib stood in one corner, but the rest of the room remained empty, as if Mark had run out of steam. He'd stopped bringing up baby-related topics on his own, and his pregnancy app notifications went unchecked more often than not. The breaking point came on a regular Tuesday evening. Sarah was sitting at the kitchen table, looking through a catalog of baby furniture, when Mark came home later than usual. His tie was loose, and he carried the weight of a bad day in his shoulders. "I didn't get the promotion," he said without preamble, dropping his briefcase by the door. "They gave it to Dave instead." Sarah set down the catalog. "Oh, Mark, I'm sorry. What happened?" "What happened?" His laugh was bitter. "They said Dave shows more commitment to the firm. Apparently, taking afternoons off for doctor's appointments doesn't demonstrate the kind of dedication they're looking for in a junior partner." "That's not fair," Sarah started, but Mark cut her off. "No. What's not fair is that I've worked there for 8 years, putting in extra hours, taking on every project they threw at me. And now, right when we need the money most, I'm passed over because I'm trying to be there for you and the baby." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. For us? Or for yourself? Because lately it feels like you're just going through the motions, doing what you think you're supposed to do. "What's that supposed to mean?" Mark's voice rose slightly. "It means I see you checking the budget every night, stressing over every penny. It means you started painting the nursery but never finished it. It means every time someone mentions the baby, you get this look on your face like you're drowning. Mark ran his hands through his hair, a gesture she'd seen more and more lately. Of course I'm stressed about money. Do you know how much babies cost? Diapers, formula, childcare, and that's just the beginning. College tuition goes up every year. We barely have enough saved for emergencies as it is. Sarah stood up slowly, one hand resting on her growing belly. I've made spreadsheets too, you know. I've looked at our budget. We can make it work if we're careful. Other people do it with less. Other people aren't trying to build a career in corporate finance. Other people didn't just watch their shot at partner slip away because they're about to become parents. Mark's voice cracked on the last word. So, that's what this is really about. Your career? Not the money, not the timing. You just don't want to be a father at all. The silence that followed her words was deafening. Mark stood frozen, his face pale. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. I don't know if I can do this, Sarah. Any of it. I look at that nursery, at all the baby stuff you're buying, and I can't breathe. I'm not ready. I don't know if I'll ever be ready. Sarah felt something inside her break. All the hope she'd been holding on to, all the small signs she'd interpreted as progress, they crumbled away, leaving nothing but the truth they'd both been avoiding. You can't keep pretending, she said quietly. It's not fair to me, and it's not fair to this baby. If you're going to be here, really be here, you need to figure out what you want. Mark sank into a kitchen chair, looking defeated. I want this. I've been trying so hard to be excited, to be the husband and father you deserve. But every time I think about actually having a baby, about being responsible for another human being, I panic. And you think I'm not scared? Sarah's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. You think I don't lie awake at night wondering if I'll be a good mother? But being scared doesn't mean we run away. It doesn't mean we give up on something this important. Important to you, Mark said softly. This was always more important to you. The words hung between them like a physical barrier. Sarah remembered all their conversations over the years about having children, how Mark had always agreed but never initiated those discussions. How had she missed the reluctance behind his easy agreement? I need some air, Mark said suddenly, standing up. He grabbed his keys from the counter. Running away won't solve anything, Sarah called after him, but the front door was already closing. She stood in their kitchen, surrounded by the pieces of the life they'd built together, feeling it all slip away. The baby catalog still lay open on the table, glossy pages showing happy families and perfectly decorated nurseries. Sarah closed it with trembling hands. Moving to the living room window, she watched Mark's car pull out of the driveway. The street was quiet, normal. Someone was walking their dog. A neighbor was getting their mail. The world kept turning while hers felt like it was falling apart. Her hand moved to her stomach, feeling the slight swell that was becoming more noticeable each day. It's just us now, little one, she whispered. The words tasted like acceptance, bitter but somehow freeing. The morning after Mark's confession, Sarah woke up alone. His side of the bed was untouched. He hadn't come home. She lay there for a moment, one hand on her growing belly, and made a decision that felt both terrifying and right. She called in sick to work and spent the morning making lists. Not the kind she'd been making with Mark, full of compromises and maybes, but real, concrete plans. She researched single-parent support groups in the area, looked into daycare centers near her school, and made an appointment with a financial advisor who specialized in helping single mothers. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mark. Staying at Dave's. Need time to think. Sarah stared at the message for a long moment before typing back. Take all the time you need. I'm moving forward with or without you. She didn't wait for his response. Instead, she called Amy, who arrived within an hour with coffee for herself and ginger tea for Sarah. They sat at the kitchen table, the same one where so many difficult conversations had happened lately, but this time felt different. I'm looking for my own place, Sarah announced, surprising herself with how steady her voice was. Amy set down her coffee. Are you sure? This is your house too. It's our house. Mine and Mark's. And I need something that's just mine now. Sarah pulled out the list she'd made that morning. I found a few apartments near school. They're small, but they allow kids. The rent would be tight, but I've done the math. Amy reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Let's go look at them. They spent the afternoon touring apartments. The first two were disappointing, but the third felt promising. It was a second-floor unit in a small complex with a tiny balcony overlooking a playground. The bedroom was big enough for a crib, and the kitchen had newer appliances. The landlady, a grandmother herself, brightened when Sarah mentioned she was expecting. We've got lots of young families here, she said warmly. Good school district, too. Standing in the empty living room after the landlady left, Sarah could see it, her furniture arranged just so, a baby swing in the corner, photos on the walls. Not the life she'd planned, but a life nonetheless. I want this one, she said quietly. Amy nodded, already pulling out her phone to start making calls. Let's make it happen. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Sarah met with a financial advisor who helped her create a realistic budget for single parenthood. She started the rental application process and began quietly packing non-essential items while Mark continued staying at Dave's. At school, she finally told her principal about the pregnancy and her changing situation. To her surprise, her boss was incredibly supportive. We've got your back, Sarah, she said firmly. Whatever you need to make this work, we'll figure it out. The moms group rallied around her too. Jenny helped her find secondhand baby furniture, and others shared their experiences with single parenthood. Their stories weren't always easy to hear, but they were real and honest, and Sarah found strength in that honesty. When Mark finally came home a week later, he found Sarah in the nursery, taking down the decorations he'd helped put up. She'd already packed most of her clothes and personal items, leaving just enough for the next few weeks until her apartment would be ready. You're really doing this, he said from the doorway. It wasn't a question. Sarah continued carefully removing the wall decals they'd chosen together. I have to. For both of us. She turned to face him. I can't keep waiting for you to decide if you want to be a father. This baby is coming, ready or not. Mark leaned against the doorframe, looking older somehow. I talked to a therapist this week. She helped me understand some things about myself, about why I've been so scared. That's good, Sarah said softly. I mean that, Mark. I hope it helps you figure things out. But it doesn't change your mind about leaving? Sarah shook her head. I need to do this. Even if you wake up tomorrow completely ready to be a dad, I need to know I can do this on my own. I need to build something that's mine. To her surprise, Mark nodded. I understand. I'm not saying I like it, but I understand. He stepped into the room and picked up an empty box. Can I help you pack? They worked together quietly, carefully wrapping the baby items she'd collected. It felt like packing up their dreams, but also like making room for new ones. When they finished, Mark helped her carry the boxes downstairs. I'll have my lawyer draw up papers, he said as they stood in the living room. For support and everything. You won't have to ask. Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes, but they were different from the ones she'd cried weeks ago. These felt more like relief, like finally letting go of something she'd been clutching too tightly. That night, lying in what would soon no longer be her bed, Sarah felt her baby move for the first time, just a tiny flutter, like butterfly wings. She placed her hand on her belly and whispered, We're going to be okay, little one. We're going to build something beautiful, just you and me. The day Sarah went into labor started like any other. She woke up in her small apartment, now fully furnished and feeling like home after 3 months. The nursery corner of her bedroom was ready, painted a soft yellow by Amy and her mom one weekend. Her hospital bag had been packed for weeks, sitting by the door like a faithful guard. The contractions started during her morning shower, mild enough that she wasn't sure if they were real. She'd had Braxton Hicks before, but something felt different this time. Still, she got dressed for work, planning to keep an eye on the timing. By second period, she couldn't ignore them anymore. Her principal took one look at her face during lunch break and called Amy to pick her up. The kids in her class made her a quick card, their little hands working furiously with crayons to finish before she left. My mom says babies take forever, one of her students informed her seriously. You'll probably be really bored. Sarah laughed, then winced as another contraction hit. I don't think I'll be bored, Tommy. Amy arrived like a whirlwind, already timing contractions on her phone app. Their parents met them at the hospital, their mom immediately taking charge of the situation while their dad paced nervously in the waiting room. "Should we call Mark?" Amy asked quietly as they settled Sarah into her room. Sarah nodded. They'd worked things out over the past months, not perfectly, but enough. He'd helped her move into the apartment, showed up to doctor's appointments when she invited him, and they'd signed papers agreeing on support and custody arrangements. He'd even started seeing his therapist regularly, working through his fears about fatherhood. The labor progressed faster than anyone expected. By the time Mark arrived, Sarah was already in active labor, the contractions coming hard and fast. He looked uncertain standing in the doorway until Sarah had a particularly strong contraction and reached out blindly for support. He moved forward then, letting her squeeze his hand. "You're doing great," he said softly, sounding surprised by his own words. Hours blurred together in a haze of pain and determination. Sarah lost track of who was in the room, focused only on her body's demands and the encouragement of her doctor and nurses. Amy never left her side, wiping her forehead and feeding her ice chips. Their mom prayed quietly in the corner while their dad continued his nervous pacing in the hallway. Mark stayed too, alternating between holding her hand and stepping back to let Amy take over. His face showed a mix of terror and awe that Sarah might have found funny if she wasn't so busy bringing their child into the world. Finally, after what felt like both forever and no time at all, their son arrived with a powerful cry that filled the room. The doctor placed him on Sarah's chest, and everything else faded away. He was perfect, tiny fingers, scrunched up face, a full head of dark hair like Mark's. "Hi, baby," Sarah whispered, tears rolling down her cheeks. "I've been waiting so long to meet you." She was vaguely aware of Amy taking pictures, of her mom crying happy tears, of the nurses efficiently going about their work. But mostly she just stared at her son, memorizing every detail of his face. When she looked up, she saw Mark standing at the foot of the bed, looking shell-shocked. Their eyes met over their son's head, and something passed between them. Not regret or blame, but a kind of understanding. They'd made this perfect little person together, even if their own path hadn't gone as planned. "Do you want to hold him?" Sarah asked softly. Mark stepped forward hesitantly, accepting the baby with careful arms. His hands shook slightly as the nurse showed him how to support the head. As he looked down at his son's face, Sarah saw something change in his expression, fear giving way to something else, something softer. "He's so small," Mark whispered. The next few days were a blur of visitors, nurses, and learning to care for a newborn. Sarah's hospital room filled with flowers and balloons, cards from her students, and what felt like half the moms group stopping by to meet the baby. Mark visited each day, staying longer each time. He learned to change diapers alongside Sarah, watching the nurses demonstrate with the same intensity he usually reserved for work presentations. They didn't talk much about the future, but the tension that had defined their interactions for months seemed to have eased. When it was time to go home, Mark helped carry everything to Amy's car, then stood awkwardly by the door as Sarah settled the baby into his car seat. "I'd like to be involved," he said suddenly. "More than what's in the papers. If that's okay." Sarah looked up at him, seeing not the man who'd panicked at the news of her pregnancy, but someone new, someone who was trying, in his own way, to be better. "He'll meet his dad," she said simply. The drive to her apartment felt different with her son in the back seat. Everything felt different now. Her small home didn't seem small anymore. It felt just right for the two of them, filled with possibility and new beginnings. That night, after Amy left and the baby was finally sleeping in his bassinet, Sarah stood by her bedroom window, looking out at the playground below. Soon enough, her son would be out there playing. She'd watch him take his first steps on that grass, teach him to ride a bike on those paths, push him on those swings. It wasn't the life she'd planned when she'd first seen those 2 pink lines on the pregnancy test. It wasn't the family story she'd imagined telling. But standing there, listening to her son's soft breathing, Sarah knew it was better than anything she could have planned, because it was real, it was theirs, and it was just the beginning. The story comes to its conclusion here. Through all 8 sections, We've followed Sarah's journey from uncertainty to strength, from broken dreams to new beginnings, maintaining a natural flow and conversational tone throughout.
Disclaimer: this channel does not support or tolerate any form of discrimination, racism, prejudice, or violation of human rights. The stories presented here are original and created by the author with the aim of promoting reflection, awareness, and dialogue. All content is developed with respect for diversity and the dignity of all people.